This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack. Yes.
Ooh, welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 294. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid. We're almost at 300. Wow.
I know. It's coming up. Probably the next month, right?
Yeah.
At the rate we're going.
Crazy. Yeah, it's really soon, actually. Yeah, I guess we'll be there in 3 episodes. No, not in 3. Why am I saying that?
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6 episodes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, 3 weeks.
Yeah. 3 weeks is what I meant, not 3
Yeah.
episodes.
So in February, we'll have to do something for that. But today, we are going to have a little book club, and we're going to break down a new book, very interesting book that in so many ways is right
Made
up
a
our
big splash.
alley.
Big splash.
It did. Before the kind of distracting geopolitical events of the last week or so, with Maduro and now Iran and the ICE murders in Minneapolis, I feel like this was kind of center on the left discourse. This was assuming prime importance. This new book, "Who Paid the Piper of Western Marxism" by academic Gabriel Rockhill.
Right. Yeah, which we mentioned before is kind of an allusion to Sanders' book, I think.
Francis Stoner Saunders.
Mm-hmm.
Who paid the piper?
Who paid the piper? Yeah,
CIA and the Cultural Cold War. There was 2 books with slightly different. I forget if she did 2 different books, so they changed the title at some point. But there's an edition called the Cultural Cold, the CIA and the Cultural Cold War.
I think it's I think that might be the subtitle. In the same way that this book is called the Intellectual Cold War, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
Or it's part of a series called the Intellectual Cold War, and this is Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism, maybe as an installment. It's hard to discern from
I'm not
it's
sure.
kind of backwards in a way, because it's not the subtitle is in big font and the super title is in little font. So maybe it's because the Intellectual World War is the overarching sort of series.
I'm not sure. It's supposed to be 3 books. This is going to be a trilogy.
I guess so. The Intellectual World War,
one.
Marxism versus the Imperial Theory Industry, Volume 1. And this is, Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism, I guess. And Volume 2 will be French Theory Made in USA. And Volume 3 will be Radical Theories Infantile Disorder. So,
interesting. I feel like that one might cover a certain Slovenian bad boy who's known for his puerile
one
observations.
hopes. I mean, I expect, because he's written about Zizek before, right?
Yeah, Mr. Zizek. And maybe the second one goes into Badiou and Foucault or Will when it comes out. It'll get into those 60s and 70s and 80s. Yeah, Derrida. Who Gabriel Rockhill studied under in France.
And Badiou as well. Badiou.
Yeah. So, I mean, somebody...
he worked with a bunch of these prominent people.
Right. Somebody, Patrick Raspberry, already asked in the chat here, he said that, I noticed Gabriel Rockhill follows you all on Twitter. You should have him on. And yes, in fact, we thought about that, and we may yet extend an invitation. I believe I have been MUFOs with Gabriel Rockhill on Twitter X for several years now. I don't know how familiar he is with the work that SJ does, but he may be passingly familiar. And I think we would, I think it would be an interesting conversation. That said, we kind of decided to take an executive decision today because this book, or at least when we planned, a week ago to do this book was kind of being battened from several different sides on the left and being criticized and attacked and become this kind of flashpoint for a lot of discourse about the critical theory, the Frankfurt School, sus left sort of celebrity theorists and the celebrity figures maybe more broadly on the left and the outsized influence that they
it kind of became a flashpoint, and mostly among people who had not read the book, so a lot of the discourse was not very productive or valuable, but it certainly there was a lot of discourse. But I think part of it was that we felt like he would go on a lot of podcasts to talk about the book and explain it, and I felt like since there was so much discourse around it, it might be more interesting just to discuss the book rather than kind of do a your sort of podcast interview stock things where people.
I think people have done some good ones. I think there's one on the Red Scare podcast. Whoa, not that Red Scare. It's a different one. It's an actually Marxist podcast. I think Nick Estes hosts it, and I listened to their interview where Gabriel Rockhill gives a very, I think, apt, able kind of summary of the ideas and the arguments and the evidence and stuff. All the stuff in this book. But I think we might have a little more room to wiggle around and examine this from multiple different angles and the backlash to it. And then so maybe at a later date. I'd love to have him on, not just strictly to talk about this book, but some of his broader work, because he's written some pretty good essays over the last 5 years or so. Particularly, he came to my attention a few years ago with one that he wrote about Zizek, about Slavoj Zizek. I think it was called Slavoj Zizek, Capitalism's Court Jester, and was very, very critical of the celebrity influence of the great ex-Yugoslav dirtbag, a Lacanian philosopher himself. And recounted, as he does in this book, his own journey through the kind of academic left theory industry, from moving from Kansas to France, probably in the late 90s, and studying under these giants, right, like Badiou and Derrida. And even, I think, when he wanted to get publish one of his first books or something, either one of his doctoral advisors or the publisher kind of really pushed him to be what you really need, what we really need for this, but you need a Zizek blurb. You got to ask Zizek for that blurb. And I think he got one from him and was oh wow, the great Zizek has smiled upon me, and now my book will sell because Zizek is promoting it, and blah blah blah. And then like these other theorists, he goes through a years long process of awakening to the susness of all these people, and just noticing that for all their posturing as cutting edge radical left, theorists who are deconstructing everything that, in the case of Zizek, sometimes I think he says in this book, he will advance a hardcore argument about communism and then endorse fascism in the same paragraph. He just is all over the place. And some of his
Zizek at this point is not even remotely even on the left, I don't think. I feel he's just a critic of leftism and really kind of a reactionary.
I think so, but actually it's a little scary when you look at comments around Zizek and stuff, and he'll still pop up on all kinds of podcasts, usually in kind of this SOCDEM kind of space, whether it's Novara Media or the kind of Jacobin Verso crowd that he's been very close to for a long time. They still got a soft spot for the slobbering Slovene, they still kind of love him because he's such a little dirtbag, and he says funny things. And I think there's a quote that circulates around him that I saw in one of these one of these episodes where he was critiquing Zizek. They said, well, somebody once said Zizek, he's always wrong, but thankfully he's wrong in such entertaining ways. And people are like, yeah, that's
Epic.
true. Epic. Yeah. Okay. Like, he's wrong about everything, and he like, lies and supports NATO bullshit. But like, he's funny.
He like,
you know,
a funny philosopher character. I mean, that was like one of the things. Like, I would be interested to see like a kind of a more like thorough take on Zizek. I mean, I don't know like when that book comes out, how much of it will be drawn out of his earlier work on him, but like, you know, an actual like thorough book length take on Zizek like could like that is like critical like in that vein could be interesting.
Oh,
like for sure. Because like that is Zizek is someone who still has like cachet like in the present. Like and like I'm not saying the history in this book like isn't like valuable and important, like it is, and like I think that like you know, he draws on a lot of secondary sources that have told that story like in various ways, and he does like some good synthesis of it and also like some good original research. But like you know, it like, you know, before we started recording, you were kind of like putting it in a good context, which is like sort of which maybe is good to contextualize this overall, which is kind of like the rivalry between like Gabriel Rockhill and like the Verso books sort of click.
Yes.
And like as sort of modern day acolytes of some of these people like Adorno and Horkheimer, because that's like where you really see their like their continued kind of influence. Because otherwise I feel like their star has kind of, you know, faded.
You would think like, oh, who besides some people in some academic humanities departments are still giving a shit about Adorno and Horkheimer and Marcuse and these old
I almost
figures.
feel like
but
in the academic humanities, again, like, you know, it's just like my you know, experience of it. So like, and I haven't like been in every philosophy department or every, you know, political science department or whatever, wherever they might be taught. But yeah, I feel like they're like their stars have really faded, I think. In fact, people like Althusser, I feel like are more popular now. I'm not sure if he would have a critique of him, but I think that he's maybe more of someone who Rockhill might appreciate. But I'm not sure. I don't think he comes up in this.
But it is interesting. Yeah, even though I think their star has faded a little bit, I think that you'd still see it burn very brightly in this crowd. And let's not forget, Verso books, I don't know how long they've been around, but they've actually been around for like, they come out of like the Cold War era, if I recall correctly, and they used to be called New Left books, and now they're called Verso. You know, so like, they very much are like the flagship publisher of like the New Left, you know, for going back decades. I don't know if they were founded in the 60s or the 70s, but you know, that they've been a center point. If you're a leftist who wants to get like a book published that's like going to make you money, you kind of have to go through the Verso Mafia most of the time. Like, there's not very many other games in town. I mean, this book was published by the Monthly Review Press, another long-standing, I believe, British, like, Marxist magazine / publishing house that has always been a little bit more like, I've read their articles over the years and stuff, like a little more like old left, like orthodox Marxist coded, I think, than like the Verso crowd or their modern offshoots. Like, I would put Jacobin in the sort of like in the nexus on the Mark Lombardi interlock chart. Like, I feel like there's probably interpersonal connections between the people who founded, you know, Jacobin and everything, you know, going back 10, 12, 13 years. But, you know, remember all those like old stories about before there was Dime Square, before there was Sovereign House, there was the Verso Loft. Remember that?
Vaguely,
I don't know what happened to the Verso Loft. It was like in Dumbo in New York. And that was where like in the late 2010s, like if you went to a party at the Verso Loft, you would run into like Jacobin writers, dirtbag left podcasters, heckin' DSA people, like people that are Twitter personalities. Like everyone was there, IRL, hobnobbing it with each other. And just basking in being like sock dem edgelords. Like, I don't know. But they reacted very negatively to this book. In fact, maybe
there was like a huge backlash, which it's very like, it's interesting. Like, I mean, there's a certain like effective charge to this book for sure, but it's odd. I wonder if it did have some kind of personal element to it, because like I almost feel like the backlash almost served as like free marketing for the book, like in a way like where like you almost might not have heard of it if it hadn't been for this like vociferous response against it. And like it was very strange because like and like so many of them hadn't even read it, and
proudly
a lot
so.
of it like isn't or even like admitted, they admitted they hadn't read it.
I think
some of them did.
It's got the same impulse, this is, not directly related, but I'm feeling a synchronicity because we're recording this like just, 2 days after probably the greatest rhythm guitarist in American history left us for the great Agartha beyond. I'm talking, of course, about Bobby Weir of the Grateful Dead, just the most beautiful man of all time. The hero of the North Star of our culture and the counterculture and resistance to evil, like, gobbling mushrooms in a drum circle with George H.W. Bush at Bohemian Grove. Such a man of the people. Anyways, but the reactions to some people, I didn't even post mean stuff about Bob Weir all weekend. I'm like, I'll let the deadheads have their weekend. Bob Weir dies. And then, I log on like Sunday and I'm seeing the most unhinged, like freaking out, like rage-filled, like deadhead, tweets or whatever. Like going after, I guess they must have seen somewhere on the timeline, like people being like, Grateful Dead sucks. And they were like CIA, like something along those lines.
I saw one great one that was like, it was like white boys don't say like the Grateful Dead is satanic anymore. And now they say it's MK Ultra. And I'm like, have I got a podcast for you? But it was, a small
they
account,
don't say they're satanic anymore. Oh yeah. Because we're like fundies for saying the Grateful Dead is like MK Ultra, which is like pretty much a verified
crazy
objective fact.
Yeah.
And that's not even the worst
alive.
Of it.
We'll say everything. They're satanic, they're MK Ultra, and they're bad.
Right, exactly. And even some people shifting the goalposts of like, kind of getting on the right side of history with Bob Weir's death, like people that that never spoke up during the last decade of Grateful Dead discourse, suddenly being like, yeah, they actually might have been CIA. That's also like, where were you? Where were you years ago when we were mocked for saying such things? But that's okay, now that they're on the right side, that's good. But what I didn't quite expect was like, the whole litany of like, shut up, I'm so sick of hearing this. Like, they were just a rock band. They're just a band. Shut up. Like, that's not serious to think about the CIA using a rock band that is very popular and trafficking drugs around the country to like do anything. That's like so not serious. Or another individual saying that anybody who says that they were like connected to MK Ultra in a sus way should be like institutionalized forcibly in a padded room, I think they said. So they should be deprived of your freedom if you question the Grateful Dead.
I thought it was a very Chomsky take. It was like, put them in camps. Like, just put them, I honestly don't care what happens to them. They've made their choice. They criticize Bob Weir.
Choice.
Yeah.
They've made their choice. They don't think Scarlet Begonias into Terrapin Station isn't the most beautiful medley of all time. They've chosen their fate.
Yeah, like, I mean, in terms of like what Rockhill is doing in his book, like, I mean, you could like critique like elements of like how it's done. I mean, it is like very, like there are a few books I've read that like do more of like, I am not saying like more than this book does, because like, and sometimes I almost feel like he could do a little bit more show and a little bit less tell about what he's not doing. But like, I also feel like I've always felt that like it's this weird phenomenon where people kind of like ignore the actual sort of like lives and the sort of situatedness of like the thinkers who they cite and they draw upon in like the actual side, even like when they're using those people's ideas. Like, for instance, like, you could write like you could do like a like Foucauldian or a Derridian reading of something that like George Bush did, but like, George Bush is like a political actor, whereas like these scholars like are not, and they operate in some kind of like, ethereal domain beyond politics and beyond history, which is just like not, or that like their ideas are like so transcendently true that they speak to all situations, where everything else is like this kind of provincial idea that can maybe at best explain what some people wrongly thought, but it can't explain like actual reality. Only like Foucault can do that. So insofar as like this book is complaining about that sort of attitude in academia, I certainly I definitely think that that's there's truth to that. He like kind of makes it into sort of imperialist, anti-imperialist thing. I think maybe there's a broader dimension to it, but anyway, yeah.
I thought I appreciated Rockhill pointing out, like early on in the book, I actually didn't know this, that one of the popularizers of the kind of idea that like you should only study the work of the philosopher, their personal life is completely relevant, and they had a quote of like, these are the only things that should be known about a philosopher, like he was born, like he did work, and he died, and that was attributed to Hannah Arendt's on and off boyfriend, right? Why am I blanking on his Heidegger. Martin Heidegger. And Rockhill points out rightfully that like it's a little ironic that this guy was the guy that was like, don't click on their early life bio on Wikipedia. I don't mean it that way, but in fact I mean it the opposite way, because Heidegger was a Nazi. He was a like proud Nazi, like kind of academic, basically, who was totally down with like National Socialism, hated communism, and yet it still like blows my mind, maybe because I wasn't exposed in any classes to the sublime, amazing thought of just the singular thought of Heidegger. But I'm like, why was this Nazi not fucking canceled after World War II? Like, it boggles my mind that this man was then elevated to like one of the most influential people, and as Rockhill like lays out, was actually a huge influence on French, critical theory in general, like French philosophy in like the post-war Cold War era, and even in the American system as well, and to the point where like he's getting name dropped by Bob Dylan. We're talking about Heidegger and Sartre, like it's just like he's a guy, he's a cool guy, like whatever. So that's almost like the most blatant example of like, should you trust the philosophical work of somebody who is so a Nazi in their personal life? Like think about today, like this person, like they're at Harvard or Stanford, and they write just this amazing philosophy. They're also in a neo-Nazi party. Like, would we expect people to like fucking like liberals to like read this person and like take their thoughts, like their philosophical precepts seriously?
Actually, now that you asked that question, yes.
I mean, like Carl Schmitt, a little bit.
If like a philosopher who was like, like if you'd say like kind of Thielite, like intellectual, wrote like the equivalent of like being in time, I almost have like no doubt
that did happen in a way. In the last decade with the Edge network, in a way it did.
So I kind of feel like, I mean, Steven Pinker kind of like is an example, like, people still like take that shit seriously, and like that Chomsky. Look at Chomsky.
But I mean, even Chomsky, for all I'll attack Chomsky wasn't like a card carrying member of the National Socialist Party. It's just like, oof, But I mean,
right. I mean, what's really bizarre about Heidegger is not that like, because I like kind of like do actually. I mean, at this point, like maybe if I had been like in the driver's seat and had been able to determine whether like this would be adopted as a canonical text, like I probably would have like not opted for that to happen. But like insofar as it has, like I think like it's not like worthless to like study Heidegger a little bit. Honestly, like I actually like read Being in Time, which I feel like not many like have done, because like it's a rough text to get through. It's like very dense and weird. I found like there isn't like too much in there that like you couldn't get from like like Muslim theologians from like the 14th century Common Era, Christian era, but like it. There's some interesting ideas in there, like the idea that being is under erasure, as I said before, like that was like a reasonable observation, but that always has to be like contextualized within like the actual fact of Heidegger's politics, from which his theory was like totally inseparable. I think really his own admission, right? Even if not like by his own explicit admission, I think it's quite clear, like in his statements, like in the support of National Socialism that he expressed, that it was like deeply connected to his like ideas about ontology, and about like the structure of the world and Dasein and all these things.
Dasein.
So So, but you can't like divorce them. But it's like very like common for people to just mention Heidegger as if like, oh, it is like self-evidently important. And so like
it doesn't matter. They're almost treating it the way it's like, oh, well, cancer, or like William Shockley, big inventor, or whatever, like invented the like transistor or something. And then he went off like spouting race science, and they're like, oh, we got to cancel you. But like, it's still like, oh, well, the transistor is still valuable. Just Werner von Braun built a bunch of advanced rockets. That's, I guess, it was for nukes and shit and going to the moon, whatever. But like, okay, like you can kind of separate, but I think when you're dealing with the humanities and like philosophy in the realm of ideas and ideology and things like that, and like interpreting reality, it feels like a very extremely liberal like mode of operating to just like silo like the philosopher, like clocks into the philosophy factory that, like, and he does philosophy and then he goes home, and these two things, as Ezra Klein said about Epstein, and my assumption is these two worlds were mostly separate. And it's like, no, they're not separate. Like if it would be weird if he wrote a bunch of philosophical stuff that like undermined his political Nazi convictions, which he held in his day-to-day life. Like that would be weird, right? And it doesn't mean that like his ideas are just pure like Nazi like propaganda that have like no value looking at like outside of that, but he clearly saw them like in accordance with one another and was like, I would assume ambiently.
Heidegger was someone who was talking about like the fundamental structure of existence and like the fundamental experience of like being in the world and being human. And another element of human history and the experience of being human is that like Nazism was a phenomenon that swept the world and that many other people still find compelling, right? So like that also is like part of like all these like topics, like it's interesting because like he kind of was trying to talk about like the basic fundamental like essentials of what it is to experience and like worldhood and things like that, but like all of that stuff, like it is like it's interesting because people kind of think the political thing is like, or in a way like his kind of thing was that like that is the political stuff is downstream of all that, but like it's actually not, like it's they're like in like a fundamental relationship.
Right.
They're like this is like one is like an expression of one, but also like it's the other is the expression of it of the other as well. One is expression of the other, and the other expression of one.
Right.
But,
you don't want to think like in that idea about kind of like philosophical dissonance with one's own personal convictions. I think it kind of recurs in its own way with some of the later people that are talked about in this book, like the Frankfurt School people who had to kind of navigate. No, I mean, actually, when you really look at their politics, they were pretty like anti-Soviet and anti-communist, like from the jump. But nonetheless, like some of them, were to like Marcuse later on was like against the Vietnam War and was like pro-civil rights and pro kind of like black liberation struggle kind of stuff like that. But then, you have to square that with like getting all your funding from like the Rockefeller Foundation and working for various like appendages of sort of the American imperial like military industrial complex in the realm of like kind of ideas and and like psychological strategy, things like that, in a kind of like weaponized academic kind of way. And like, how did they, because they would deny if like people, whenever people would come at them and be like, you're a CIA agent, they'd be like, LOL, I'm CIA.
Right.
Like, come on, like, be serious, and it's like, well, I don't know. Like, and I mean, that also gets to, there's a lot of methodological groundwork in this book, I think, like going back to what you're kind of saying of like, and I think a lot of preempting critique, like anticipating the critiques that are going to come at him for talking about the subject. And I think, I think you're right. Like there could actually be a little bit more just like hard, let's get into like hard details and like original kind of research to like really drive this home. I guess maybe this is like a volume 1 thing where he's like laying out his methodological framework and very much like returning to the well of dialectical and historical materialism, or he would call it DHM.
Yeah, acronym that comes up. He will often use the phrase "actually existing socialism," which is something that I thought was like a product of Twitter, but I guess like it was like Bafro who I guess Marcuse helped promote heavily. It's like East German dissident. He apparently used it like as a subtitle of one of his books.
Was that? Well, I think it might have even gone back to
real existing socialism.
Yeah, I think it might have even gone back to Trotskyists, like in the earlier thing when they were kind of trying to label like various countries and things like that. I might have that wrong, but like, I mean, now it's used by like a lot of people. I think it's actually probably, if anything, used more by like ML kind of type people today, right. Because they're talking about Cuba, the DPRK, Vietnam, China, like the remaining countries that have, outwardly like Marxist-Leninist governments. And this is actually existing socialism. That like oftentimes it's like, we should defend this because it's actually existing. And like, you shouldn't just like sit in your ivory tower and like bash them all the time.
You want socialism, but you're not supporting like the actually existing socialism. Instead, you're talking about like an idea of socialism that has like, no existence in like the actual world.
This is actually interesting. This was a term that was popularized, a catchphrase popularized during the Brezhnev era in the Eastern Bloc countries. So I don't know who first like, so Rudolf Barrow actually kind of took it and flipped it in a critical way to like talk about. It's like,
how much it sucked. Yeah,
how much it sucks. Yeah,
it's kind of like how real communism has been tried. The kind of like right wing meme of like, whenever, like this kind of a no true Scotsman sort of thing is what they sort of attack communists with, right?
Yeah. The U.S. Communist Party activist Erwin Silber said in 1994, the term actually existing socialism is not, despite the quotation marks, a sarcasm. In fact, while obviously containing an implicit irony, the phrase itself was coined by Soviet Marxist-Leninists and was widely used by the CPSU and its supporters in polemics with those who postulated a model of socialism significantly different from the system developed in the Soviet Union. Its point was that various alternatives to the Soviet-derived model existed only in the minds of their advocates, while, quote, actual socialism existed in the real world. This term was also taken up by some dissidents, such as Rudolf Barrow, who used it in a more critical way. And that's the guy that the DDR dissident that Marcuse had very close ties to in like the late 70s. He became a leader of the West German Green Party, but later left because he was disillusioned. Pretty sus, that West German Green Party. But anyways, so he does return back to that well a lot, and I thought this is an interesting. I think he's very laudatory in like interviews and in the book about like Michael Parenti, and uses him as an example of a proud like pro-communist like Marxist-Leninist academic who I believe he got his PhD from Harvard, maybe. I think he did.
Parenti? I didn't know that.
I believe Parenti did, but he was never able to secure like a tenure track teaching position due to his outspoken politics.
He did it at Yale.
Okay, Yale. That's right. And so I think especially comparing him to one of his contemporaries, Noam Chomsky, which people have actually been doing a lot the last month or two, you can see how the system rewards and punishes or declines to reward, certain people with certain radical leftist perspectives in politics, like Chomsky's, for a lot of different reasons we can kind of dissect, was quote unquote what Thomas Braden, what CIA bigwig Thomas Braden called the compatible left that they wanted to support during the Cold War.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.